Well, the investment universe has so many choices, and the language that we use to interact with this crowded world of ticker symbols and screens and filters makes investing a rather complicated exercise. And to help us sort through this and talk about that as well as a solution, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Vinay Nair, CEO and co-chairman of Magnifi. He's also a finance professor at Wharton and fintech entrepreneur. Vinay, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with this proliferation that we've seen of investment products, especially ETFs, that have hit the marketplace. And really, it's increased the number of decisions and that investors as well as financial advisors need to make. So what obstacles do you see facing both advisors and investors when it comes to researching all of these investment opportunities?
That's right, Ron. There's a proliferation of these products out there. More than 6,900 globally traded ETFs and exchange-traded notes, more than 2,000 just in the US. Add to that the number of mutual funds, more than 10,000. We're looking at a universe that is much larger than the number of listed stocks, to put that in context. And add to that model portfolios, another 10,000 plus.
Yeah.
So overall, the challenge of finding investment products, and specifically ETFs, is daunting. What Magnifi attempts to do is to simplify this task, all the way from discovery to diligence, from finding relevant funds and within the relevant funds, finding which ones are the best fit. Now, to answer that problem, first, people need answers rather than information. The way the finance industry has tried to tackle this is by providing information rather than simply answering the question. Think of it as, I'll give you data, you go do the math yourself and conclude whether this is relevant and a good fit. This is the difference between a Google and New York Public Library, or any public library, just a large one, where you have to go figure out which aisle to go to, which shelf to go to, which book to really pick, what to read, so you get to learn what you want to learn. What Magnifi attempts to do is simplify that process, because that's what investors really need to navigate this complex offering. What they also need is the simplicity in language. I don't know if you've seen this movie, The Two Popes, when Pope Benedict says, anytime I want to deliver bad news, I speak in Latin. That's how I feel, when people break out into financial jargon that the client and often the advisors even don't even understand from the asset managers.
Yeah.
So the starting point of relevant discovery, communication, diligence is simplicity and ease of use without sacrificing quality. That's what the investors really need today.
Let's discuss how Magnifi helps advisors find the ETFs they're looking for. You kind of alluded to that, but you've also got a customizable comparison calculator, which I think is a very important tool. Tell us a little bit more about that.
That's right. So the investment journey starts with the discovery of relevant funds, but it doesn't stop there. You have to then go within these relevant funds. You have to dig deeper into these relevant funds to figure out which of these relevant funds is the best fund for you. Now, your criteria might be different from someone else's. You, Ron, may prefer lower fees to historically lower risk. I might prefer higher historical returns to fees. And these are just two variables. There are dozens of such things, whether you want to look at bid-ask spreads, NAVs, liquidity, volume, assets, duration, so on and so forth. And the ability to do this, to personalize this, to customize this, and to find the best fund very quickly is what our fund selector enables investors to do. And they can customize it, set it, forget it. And every time they discover a fund, it can go through this fund selector and tell them whether the fund has a score that is higher or lower given their preferences. For example, Ron, if I log into Magnifi and I query for, let's say, market neutral funds, which seem very relevant in today's context and has been one of our more popular queries. If you go to Magnifi and given the current environment and the context, perhaps you want to search for market neutral funds. Let's restrict that search to ETFs. You'll see there's a set of market neutral funds that show up immediately, and in the interface, you'll see the market neutral score, which is calculated for each fund based on its exposure and based on the text in the prospectus. Now, let's say I select the first three. They all seem very relevant. Among the first three, the question now is which one is the best fund for the user that is conducting this search? So within the shopping cart, if the user goes to the Compare tab, this is where you will find our fund selector. Now, within the fund selector, the user could specify that fees are the most important thing for them. And then after fees, perhaps risk is the most relevant piece. Now, with these set of criteria, what you'll find is QMN shows up as an 85% best fit for this specific user. The answer is very different if a risk-conscious user says, I care about risk and not about fees at all, and I care about historical return, not at fees at all. Turns out QMN is still at top, but with 65% score and much closer to, say, MOM, which is a market neutral momentum fund.
Got it.
This is an example of how the fund selector can help someone very quickly understand why a fund can become a better choice relative to another fund.
Excellent. Let's move along and talk about financial firms and advisors, which have been employing more and more model ETF portfolios. How important is it for advisors to be able to do that research and execute that due diligence on these model portfolios? And tell us a little bit more about how Magnifi helps with that.
Model portfolios create a whole nother layer of complexity. You know, we all agree that the way you discover funds is inefficient. Tickers, filters, screens, and it's really designed for doctors to find the medicines, and most of us are not doctors. But model portfolios don't even have tickers to begin with. So it is extremely difficult for any user, advisor, and investor, even a researcher, to identify which model portfolios would, for example, give me a yield more than 1%. And I want to see this list across all sponsors. This is not straightforward. Yeah. Or if I want to ask a question of show me which emerging market model portfolios hold IEMG, which is one of the tickers that you may happen to know.
Yeah.
And this is not an easy task either. So especially in the context of model portfolios, when you do searches such as these, you could get all the relevant model portfolios across the sponsors delivered to you. And you could go back to the fund selector that we just spoke about. Instead, it's now a model selector, and use that just the way you use the fund selector to identify which would be the best model fit for you. Today's model marketplaces are really difficult to navigate for a user in both discovering relevant models and identifying the best models for them. Magnifi simplifies that process.
Excellent. Now, let's suppose that an advisor is searching for rebounding oil prices with no leverage. There's something else that we want to look for. How would that work?
Exactly like you described it. You could basically say, hey, I want to bet on rising oil, no leverage. And you get results that will reflect the relevant funds, this time ranked on the beta to oil. And if you do that today on the platform, you find several mutual funds with an IV mutual fund showing up on top. And if you restrict it again to ETFs and ETNs, you find things like Oil X, USO, OIL, OILK. These are all different funds, all relevant, that give you exposure to oil without any leverage. There are funds that show up at 3 times if you remove the no leverage clause. And this is an important point because typical search even outside of finance, struggles with negation because it is not semantic. Most search is index search. So if I search for no leverage, you'll often find leverage as the word that matches with things. Now, this might sound like sausage making, but from an investor context, think about often investors know what they don't want, not what they want. Often investors know, hey, I want to bet on emerging markets, but not China. I want Latin America, not Brazil. I want tech sector, not Facebook. These are all types of queries which you can very easily input into Magnifi, exactly as I described it, and get answers.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, how those types of queries for today's legacy systems are quite sophisticated, yet for Magnifi, it's what was really built to do. One final thing before you take off, Vinay, is how do you see Magnifi really being a game changer for financial advisors in terms of how they're helping their investment clients?
This goes back to how we started the discussion, Ron. I think that what Magnifi really enables anyone, and especially an advisor, to do is cut down the amount of time that they take. I would say by more than 99%. If you wanted to save funds similar to XLE, download data from most existing places, look at all the positions, look at the overlaps, figure out a score, that's at least a few hours of work. And this was a second year on the platform. So firstly, it saves them an amount of time that is disruptive. This is not 10% more, 20% less. This is really orders of magnitude different. And helps them communicate this with the end clients in a way that the end client no longer feels stupid asking a question around investments. And very quickly, advisors can look at a prospect's portfolio and within a second suggest an improvement. Show me an alternative with a higher yield. Show me an alternative with a lower income. Show me an alternative with lower risk, etc. Without having to constantly go back to a complicated research resource, spend on it, take days, take time.
Yep.
At the core of it, what Magnifi really helps and changes the game, I think, is in enabling better client portfolios with much lesser time and effort.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us. You just heard from Dr. Vinay Nair, CEO and co-chairman at Magnifi.com. Go there. I'm Ron DeLegge with ETFguide TV. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.